This is the Carver Select Board joint meeting with the Finance Committee for March 10th, 2021. This meeting is being cablecast by Area 58 Community Access Cable Media, Channel 15, and will be posted by Area 58 on YouTube as soon as possible. There are openings on several committees. Please refer to the Select Board page on our website for a listing and application. Mr. Chair of the Finance Committee, would you like to open your committee's meeting?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The Finance Committee for Carver on March 10th. I want to apologize for the delay. We had some problems getting a Wi-Fi password into the computer. We have a couple members joining by Zoom, and without them, we did not have a quorum. So I apologize for the lengthy delay, but we're up and running.
Thank you for your help.
This meeting is to order.
Would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would someone like to lead us in the community prayer?
Almighty God, humbly we pray your blessing as we concern our life with the opportunity to serve our community. Enhance us with your spirit of dignity and selflessness. May we become instruments of support and understanding as we seek to bring an environment of trust and purpose among all who provide the many services that make us all that we can become. Help us achieve the goals of our commitment in this office that is now our responsibility. And especially, we lift our prayers for all the citizens of our community that we have been allowed to serve, that they may discover the fullness and joy of life that we all seek, and keep those serving in our armed forces and our first responders in our hearts and thoughts. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Our agenda tonight is very limited. We're going to have a discussion and possible vote to review the FY22 budget and recommendations for all other town meeting warrant articles. Mr. LaFawn, would you like to start us off?
Sure, and I would certainly defer to Mr. Germain if you ever want to chime in or interrupt or anything like that. I'm here for you. Okay, well, I think it might be best just to take you through the brief summary that I passed out. And then if you'd like to go through some of these general categories or line items by department, and there are some fairly brief explanations that I think most of you have already heard. I forget what date, but maybe about 6 weeks ago, roughly, I did a brief presentation to the board.
Mr. LaFawn, pull that mic a little bit closer
Certainly.
if you don't mind. Thank you so
And
much.
the Finance Committee has seen everything. We have had our conversations. They have interviewed their department heads, and what you see in front of you, these spreadsheets, is the recommendation from me and the Finance Committee is exactly the same. We did have a little bit of, minor back and forth, but I think, the good thing is that, this committee understands this budget and these department heads for quite some time, so that has made it a little bit less contentious. So just briefly, this budget recognizes the full 2.5% levy available under Prop 2.5. And for new growth figure, we're using a 75% average of the last 6 years. So that's fairly modest. I think those of you who've been involved in budget processes before would agree. One of the challenges we have at the moment is that we've overcome is, if those of you who are familiar with the cherry sheet, we did have what would appear to be an increase in state aid, but that is offset significantly by our state and county assessments to the tune of about negative $80,000 in overall help from the state this year. And we are using a decrease in local estimated receipts, again, using a 6-year average, and zeroing out the meals tax for now. So I think, and I'm sure people will agree, that we're being reasonably modest. We're not being hyper conservative, but we are still somewhat conservative in our revenue estimates. Some of the highlights you'll see here is with the exception of the things I'm going to mention, it is a level services budget. You're all aware there is a wage and classification plan that has been adopted by the Select Board in the past. There are collective bargaining agreements with benefits increases that must be recognized. This budget does all that. It maintains currently the full funding of the Planning and Permitting Department, which we've discussed. You will see that traditionally there is a number in the line called Town Hall Additional Hours, Salary Adjustments, Incentive Pay. We estimate that there's funding in there to help us transition from the current staffing to the full-time building commissioner, rather than build that into the actual budget, the PEP budget right now, because we're not exactly sure how this is going to happen, over what period of time. We have discussed, and I've discussed with the Finance Committee Chair and the Vice Chair in particular, that it would probably be best, rather than July 1, just move into this entire new setup, is to actually transition into it a little bit slower as we have our permitting software up and running. And we have, it's going to take time to hire somebody for a full-time position. So rather than just make a decision and put funding in place that would be effective July 1, it would be best to recognize the existing structure and then transition into this over some period of time.
Mr. Levon, could I interrupt you for a
Yes.
moment? When you say the PEP department, that is the Planning, Environmental, and Permitting Department?
That is correct.
Thank you.
So, thank you. I'm sorry, let me continue. This does maintain the current schedule for the Capital Stabilization Fund. It does provide funding for the recommended plan, that most of which was scheduled. There have been some differences, slight adjustments over the course of this process. And it does, we have a zero increase in health insurance. Well, that would be no increase, wouldn't it, in health insurance? So that's obviously one of the major factors making this work right now. It does maintain the split between the school and the non-school budgets that's in our financial plans. The recreation coordinator has been added to the budget, as opposed to being a town meeting article every year. The utilities that have been borne over a period of time by the Recreation Commission committee, those are now moved into the O&M. You may be aware that over the past, I'm not sure how many years, probably a generation or two, the utility bills that are paid for the fields and everything were actually part of the rec budget. It's the only department that was actually paying its utilities instead of in the O&M budget. So that obviously makes it frees up a little bit of their resources, and it's the right thing to do. It does add the differential for police sergeants, as we discussed in the past. That was one of the initiatives that we had hoped to create, to accomplish rather, so that the department can promote from patrol to sergeant positions to start getting ready for the transition in a few years. It does fund the software, online permitting software, and it does recognize one of the budget busters. Our pension assessment is up about $100,000. Continuing with some of the notes here, I see that I've probably been a little redundant, but I guess I want you to really understand some of these things. I think that's about the highlights. I don't think there's anything else. There's certainly nothing more notable that you haven't already heard in the past. One other piece of this puzzle, though, is we do have about $1.4 million in free cash, and there is a schedule, or a proposed schedule that's in the warrant. What I've listed here are just some of those things that I would consider, I don't say highlights, but things that you more substantial. Special Education Reserve, which people are familiar with. The North Carver Water District debt, that's part of the appropriation from free cash we'll be seeking. The landfill at Plymouth Street monitoring, and I'll come back to that in 1 second. The Health Insurance Mitigation Fund, which was intended to be fully funded in FY 2023. That is we're recommending that be funded entirely for this year and FY 23 from free cash. Number one, to get it off the books, and number two, so that that's not an expense that has to be borne by both the school and the town operating budgets, which would be somewhat of a hardship for a item that is going to expire in FY23 anyway. It does fully restore, which I'm happy to say, the general stabilization fund that some of you may recall that we used about $220,000 from that in the October special town meeting in order to balance the budget without making any reductions. And in fact, I don't know that we made any reductions. I think we worked out pretty well, and it was, I think, the unanimous, it was the, not just the consensus, I think it was the unanimous vote of the town to do that. Again, it's something that I had hoped, I think we all hoped we'd be able to do, but to be able to restore those funds, I think is somewhat of a little bit of a victory. I wouldn't want to go unnoticed. It does take some of the funding out of the select board budget for the contract that expires in the end of this fiscal year. And it does go to fund what you'd call the recreation budget. The salary is being moved from one account from free cash into the budget. Some of the recreational expenses and programs are paid through for a revolving fund. I think as time goes on, it would probably be prudent to really get a sense of what recreation expenses are recurring and ultimately move those into the budget too. So that is what the major things to understand about what we're proposing for a free cash expenditure. And the rest of these items are just for those who like visuals. I don't know if anybody wants to add. This is a $44 million budget. It's the initiatives you see in here are reasonably lean. There are some very few reductions. There's a reduction in the select board office, half a position due to retirement. We're able to take advantage of some attrition. It's obviously going to be a little bit of a hardship, but those are things you do. There's one position in the library that's a vacant position that we're also we're proposing not to fund in this budget. I don't know if there are other, Alan or Meg, any significant differences or other things that you can think of that I haven't mentioned. But I do want to say, though, I think this has been a great process. We've had some compromises. We've had some words in the hallways, me and chair and vice chair. But I think in the end, I think we have a real good consensus. Certainly, me and the Finance Committee are in lockstep on what we're proposing to this board. So, and again, I don't know how you want to go about this, Sarah. There are some, I guess, fairly minor notables that some of them are consistent with the handout, but I don't know what kind of detail you want to get into.
Well, I should
If you're prepared to vote, that would be fine too.
Sorry?
If you're prepared to vote, that would be fine too.
Okay. So, do the board members have any specific questions for the town administrator on this? Any particular items?
Madam Chair.
I think Alan's raising his hand. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. Mr. Chair. Can you really speak into the mic there, Alan, so people can hear you?
I never thought I needed a microphone, Madam Chair. The town administrator is right. We met with everybody, and aside from a couple of changes we made, and I'll tell everybody, there was $1,000 that was added to the COA for our activities.
Thank you.
We thought that was a great idea. We just thought it was a great idea. And there was $1,300, and I want to bring this up because this tells you the caliber of the department heads. Last year, I suggested in the veterans budget this year, they plug in $1,300 to do wreaths at the graves of the veterans in town because I thought it was respectful. Well, when I asked where that money was this year, the veterans administrator said, I actually have a part-time person and I'd rather use that money to give him additional hours. And I said, I think I'd like to have my cake and eat it too. So let's give him the additional hours and let's give him the $1,300 for the wreaths. So that's
I
where
like that.
the $2,300 came a little bit out of whack. I got yelled at by the finance director because the budget was balanced, and I got a nasty gram right after that
Yeah.
saying, and exactly where do I get this from?
You should hear the things she said to me.
I can only imagine.
Boy,
Meg does not like it when things equal zero, for you to come in behind her and upset that.
go get them if you want.
But we really thought it was respectful to the veterans. I was extraordinarily impressed at the humility of a man who said, I'd really rather give the additional hours to the part-time help.
Yeah.
So he would forfeit in order to help someone. And I just felt that, I asked the board what they all thought, but I got greedy, if you will, and I said, let's just do both. So that's where that money came from, $2,300. On a side note, everybody knows that, it actually was in the paper, that I was going to challenge the school on buses. So I had a conversation with Ron Griffin. He sent me some detailed information on what's going on with the 2008 buses. And the Finance Committee will support that purchase if the town so votes that on the capital side of things at town meeting. If this is what they think. They gave us, it was approved last year, and honestly, they could have said, hey, you guys approved it, we're buying 2 buses. They didn't. So my thing this year was, well, maybe you could buy 1 bus, and then Ron said, let me get you the information. He was extraordinarily good about, let me get you the information. And he did. And so I'm kind of back on the, if town meeting wants to go ahead and approve 2 buses, then FinCom will have no objection. So that's pretty much it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Jermaine. Any members of the Select Board have any questions, comments? Mrs. Bogart?
All right, so just an overall thing, the 2.5% levy increase, do we do that just because we can? Because the law allows it? And when was the last time we didn't increase by the full 2.5%?
Mr. LaFawn?
I'll give it a shot. Well, you don't have to raise 2.5%. I think in the big picture, you realize that, inflation, not just salary inflation, but your benefits, health costs, some of which is out of your control, those tend to rise significantly more than 2.5%. So 2.5% of a levy is less than 2.5% of your overall revenue, because your entire revenue stream, only about 62% of your overall revenue stream can be inflated by 2.5%. So when you take 40% of your revenue that's not necessarily within your control, especially state aid, which is a huge part of the revenue stream, the reality is that you become more dependent on other sources of revenue to fund your recurring cost than the revenue that you have. So it's a little bit dangerous not to be using your 2.5 levy. And it's still a very modest amount. 2.5% is really not even just modest. I think you'll find for the last generation, people have complained about that being, well, I'll say too modest. Once again, you can't, when you have all your fixed costs rising, usually much more than inflation, and state aid is very speculative a lot of times, especially in times like this. It's flat or sometimes negative. Your 2.5% levy is, it's what you survive on, unfortunately. I would say I don't believe this town has spent below the levy. Certainly not in my recollection. I think you'll find that the overwhelming majority of cities and towns in the state utilize the full levy, because once again, that's all you have, and it's the only thing that you can count on. And realistically, when you get into these periods of flat state aid, 2.5% is more like, 1% or less in terms of your growth in your overall budget. So if you forfeit a year of raising that levy, well, then you can be behind indefinitely, and when it's time, when you need additional funds to fund your budget, then you might be looking at an override just to get up to your regular levy amount. So there's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of the fact that cities and towns have been strapped really since the early 80s with the tax limitation law, which, by the way, I don't think many people would at this point say that that wasn't a good thing. We all pay taxes to somebody. But on the other hand, it does, when you look at, since 1982, I believe, you have revenue growth in your property tax that is less than inflation. So you're talking about, 40 years of tighter and tighter and tighter budgets, unless there's a significant inflow of state aid, which does happen periodically, but generally it's reasonably modest. So I don't know if that completely answers your question, but.
Yeah, being part of that tax classification hearing we had not that long ago, being my first time, really impacted me. I learned a lot from that. And the biggest thing was coming to realize that you set the budget. Town meeting says we want to spend this much money, and then the taxes have to meet that. When I know that in the past I thought it was backwards. And I remember saying at that meeting, I really hope when it's time to craft the budget, everyone try to be as frugal as possible. And I got to tell you, what you just said about the veterans agent makes me so happy. Like, I don't have the right words. That's amazing. I would like to think that everyone did that, just because you can raise it 2.5%, in my opinion, doesn't mean you always should. There is inflation. You can't fight inflation. You can't argue inflation. You can't argue how state aid is not keeping up with the needs of the town. But just because you can do something, in my opinion, doesn't mean you always should. And I wish everyone did what the veterans agent did. And I like how you reacted to it, Alan, and I appreciate the committee doing that too, because I think the veterans agent did the right thing. And I would love to see there be a year when the town doesn't increase it all just because we can, even if that means just taking a year off. It would just be nice to know, to not be sitting at home waiting for my tax bill knowing that it's going up 2.5%.
Well, the challenge here is that, most, 75, 80% of your overall costs in a municipal government is personnel. I mean, government is basically people doing things that generally that the private sector can't make money doing. So when you're talking about, stable or reducing budgets, you're talking about trying to overcome the fact that there are pay raises that are put in place either by wage and classification plans approved by the town. These aren't willy-nilly, obviously. Collective bargaining agreements that are negotiated and approved by whether it's this board, school committee, et cetera, and voted by town meeting. So in a sense, we're following the will of town meeting in terms of what the expenditures are. And granted, we do propose them. So, and it's possible we could propose to spend less under the levy. But once again, the challenge is that when the overwhelming cost structure in municipal government is salaries, and the only way to make any significant reduction in the tax rate and the tax bill is by making some serious personnel cuts. That's fortunately or unfortunately, that's the reality of municipal government.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Jermaine.
Just to expand just real quick, Jen, thank you for that, by the way. The problem with it is, and I'd like nothing better, believe me, every time a tax bill comes, I hold my breath too. But Rick's 100% right. Until you sit down and actually talk with the department heads and watch them balance departments literally on the head of a pin sometimes. Yeah. Is there fluff in this budget? Absolutely there's fluff in this budget. There's fluff in everybody's budget, even your household budget. Because we don't know what the light bill's going to be. And we don't know what the heating bill's going to be, but we got to plug in a number. So if we were to err on the side of extreme conservatism, then we'd have the finance director coming back to us in April and May saying, we're short in this account by $20,000, we need a transfer. Or we cut this one short. The other problem is if you put off and I'm not picking on the schools, but if you put off employees and the schools and from a pay raise for like a year or 2 years, like take a sabbatical, we're going to level fund, no raises. When it comes time to give the raise, they're not going to want the 2%. They're going to now want the 4 or 5 or 6%. So that now we have to play catch up. So now the 2.5% levy increase for only that year, because you can't go back, won't cover the current numbers that they're now asking for, that you struck a deal with them 3 years ago to give you a break on. So now we're in looking for an override, or we start saying, well, you go home, you go home, you go home, we're sorry. So it's a wicked balancing act, and I couldn't agree with you more. I'd like nothing better than to lock down a budget that was ironclad. A municipality, I think that's impossible. We don't know what storms are coming. We don't know how much overtime the DPW is going to need in the case of there's a hurricane or whatever comes through town. We don't know what the light bill is going to be, the heating bill. We don't know what the gasoline costs are. We're sitting here now, we're going to balance a budget, yet diesel fuel is up 80 cents a gallon, gasoline is up 40 cents a gallon. We have vehicles that run on both of those products. So now we just don't know. It makes it very difficult. So I think what Meg tries to do, and I think what Rick tried to do this year, and I think what his predecessor did also, because I worked with him also, was you look at it and you say, okay, we can leave that one alone, but let's put 2% more in the propane side. We'll leave the light alone. So the electric can stay at this number, but the propane will go up a little bit because they're forecasting a cold winter, and then in the spring, well, it wasn't that cold. Now we can move some of that money into the electric light line, because that was a little higher than we anticipated that to be. And at the end of the year, we only come back with, what was the turnbacks last year, Meg, for the town?
I think it was about $600,000.
Meg, can you speak into the mic?
Sorry. It was about $600,000, which it sounds like a lot, but I mean, it's just as you said, though, there's fluctuation, and you never know, like you have a snow and ice year, and all of a sudden,
Sure.
all of that is gone, or half of that is gone. So, I mean, or utilities have been low for the last couple of years, so that also, it could cause a situation where you're having a turn back, and then the following year, the year after, it's in a deficit, and you're trying to raise it. So I think the thing with municipalities is it's very difficult to predict where you're going to be. So that's why the budget is set where it is. It's our best guess as to what the future is going to be.
And that's really all it is a guess, other than the contractual obligations that we have to, we now know that employees are going to get a COLA, or they're going to get their contract plus 2%, 3%, 4%, whatever their number is that was already negotiated. We can pretty much assume, I know my light bill's gone up, we can assume that the electric light bill's going to go up a little bit. We can assume that propane's going to go up. We don't know what everything's going to do. We know insurance is going to go up, but there are things that will come down. The thing that I tried to avoid, and I expressed this to Meg, and I was emphatic with Rick when he said, we don't know where we're going to be this year because we don't know about revenue yet, because we don't know what this pandemic's going to ultimately do for the summer. We don't even know if Edaville's going to open. There may be no King Richard's Fair. Well, that's revenue back to the town. I said, we need to look at a budget, and I don't want to hear one layoff. I just don't. Find a way to, let's buy less paper from WB Mason before we cut somebody out of a department. Let's find a way to buy less paper clips, turn a light bulb on, whatever you got to do, until we have no choice. But don't make the employee cut the first thing we go to. Because that's what a lot of places do, because it's an immediate gratification to a bottom line. I've never thought that was a solution to a budget reconciliation. I thought it was a Band-Aid. Because what happens is 6 months later, they come back and they say, hey, we can't survive without that person we had to let go. So now we got to hire somebody new, usually at more money than the guy we let go. So now we're back behind the 8 ball again. And they did it. They didn't, aside from attrition, creating a couple of vacancies, nobody has been laid off because of this budget this year.
If I could add one more thing, and this isn't really, I think, I know Jen knows this and the people up here know it, but for those newer people and people who might be listening, I'm not sure it's recognized, and I certainly wouldn't, that the overwhelming amount of what cities and towns do in a budget is fund legal requirements. For instance, we need a town clerk's office to do certain things to comply with state law. We need an assessing office. We need an accounting office. You know, we need to do things. Our fire and police have statutory obligations to fulfill. And so we have to be cautious that we don't get to a point where we can't fulfill the requirements of state law, never mind local bylaws. And like I said, I know people here know that, but I think not everybody recognizes that we try to spend as little as we can on those things that we have to do so that we can hopefully spend more money on those things we want to do. Like, what do we want to do? We want recreation. You know, we want to, and close your ears here, Mr. School Superintendent, you know, we want to offer as much programming as we can in the school department. So there are things we want to do, and to the extent that we can spend less on what we have to do, you know, we're better off. The problem is that it's the state that always tells us what we have to do. And most of what we do is, in some fashion, is comply with statutes and regulations, and it's frustrating, but I think this town's been able to do it well for a long time, so. And again, can I get on my soapbox right now?
Yes, I just wanted to add something, though.
I'll make it very quick.
Okay.
Okay, and this is to Alan's point, and it's a simple thing about the veterans agent. You know, the veterans agent was, you know, prepared to go out and do fundraising, which I'm sure he would have achieved for the wreaths, but I think it goes back to the point I've discussed before, is that, you know, we can all add, subtract, multiply, and divide. But those are the types of things that mean something to people's lives, and that's why I appreciate the fact that that the Finance Committee, you know, really, I don't want to mean it wasn't important to me, but I'm glad they wouldn't put up with it. So,
Well, and to your point, Mr. LaFont, I wanted to add that those things that we have to do as a town, they get accomplished by people. I mean, our budget really is like 90% people.
Yeah, it is.
And so if we're going to cut that, as you pointed out, that's affecting people's life in a real way. That affects people's lives.
When you tell me that we can't afford to turn a light bulb on because we're broke, then maybe I'll consider, as a Finance Committee chair, I would consider, okay, well, what department can we cut somebody out of? Because that person we cut out of, they got a life too. Nobody wants to hear that. So I think, honestly, this is an exceptionally decent budget, but there is fluff, and there's a roundabout way. I'm kind of glad there's some fluff in it. Otherwise, you'd be back before the Finance Committee doing transfer request after transfer request, and the town administrator couldn't do his job.
I don't think $2,300 is fluff.
I don't think so either. We got a couple $100,000 on page 7.
Oh,
I'm
stop.
just kidding. Does anybody on my committee, Adam, Pat, did you have anything you want to jump in with?
I'd like to make a comment or two if I could.
Please do, Mr. Mahon.
Go ahead.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, this is Pat Maha from Home, and I think as many of you know, over the years, I've been involved in a lot of these budget processes when I was working for the school department. And some of those years were pretty good years, and some of those years were sometimes not so good years. So I know what is involved, and I know what goes into the budget process and coming up with a budget, a good budget. And this year is very unique as to anything that we've ever seen before. And I think there was a phenomenal job done by everyone, from the town administrator, the finance director, and all of the department heads. All did a great job. Bottom line was, it's a level serviced budget, which was fantastic. And as Alan and others were talking about, no reduction in force, and that is so important. And I always kind of obsessed about that when I was in the school department. No reductions in force. There were also did not go into the rainy day fund. Okay, so there was that part of the budget too. And when I see presentations being done for the budget, some of the things that I look for are department heads that come in and can articulate a very coherent explanation of their budget from the previous year, what was done for the current year, and for the next year, what is done. And I saw all that with the department heads coming in, and particularly department heads now that we have a track record of also doing that. So the bottom line is I was very impressed and very satisfied with the budget that was presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mahar.
Adam, you want to add anything?
I am all set at this time. I don't have anything else to add. Thank you, everybody.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else have any comments, questions? Seeing none? Mrs. Bogart?
Are we just kind of talking about everything or diving into the articles on the warrant?
We're
'Cause I
just
do-
talking about, we're discussing and voting on the budget right now, and then we will do the warrant articles.
Okay, so, I'm just trying to figure out where the budget fits into the warrant, because
It's a warrant article.
do we? So number 4?
Correct, yes.
Okay, will we get to 2 and 3 for specifics on that tonight, or?
We're going to try to do all the warrant articles if we can manage to do that.
Okay, so
So right now, we're just doing the
just
budget,
overall? Okay.
because that's often one that takes a while. But seeing as there are no more comments, is there a motion from the board to recommend this budget for FY '22?
I'll make a motion that we recommend the budget.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll second that. So moved.
Thank you both. There's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the select board? Seeing none, all in favor of recommending FY '22 budget to town meeting?
Aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye as well. We should have a roll call vote since it's on Zoom.
Mark Townsend says aye.
Mrs. Bogart?
Oh, Jen Bogart says aye.
Can you speak into the mic?
says aye.
And Sarah Hewen says aye. The motion passes unanimously to recommend the FY '22 budget to town meeting. Mr. Germain, have you all voted on this already?
Yes, we have. It was our vote that this budget in its entirety was voted to recommend to the select board. So you guys have it. So we've already voted this.
Okay. Can you just use the mic because it's kind of hard to hear you for some reason?
I can.
Thanks.
We've gone through all of it at 3 different meetings, and it has all been approved by the FinCom to recommend to the select board. So you guys just voted on it, so
Thank you. That's
the
true.
budget as it's printed on my original paper, and it does duplicate this one, is the same, so that's it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Germain.
We also took some time with capital, even though it wasn't our purview, and I don't know if you're going to get to that tonight or not, but,
I'm hoping to, if we can move along.
okay.
Okay, let's start with Article 1, Annual Town Report. Is there a motion to recommend this article?
Motion to recommend.
Sorry.
Sorry, motion to recommend.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, roll call vote, please.
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jen Bogart, aye.
Jim Hoffman, aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye. So that's 4-0, passes unanimously. Article 2, supplemental appropriations for fiscal 2021. Mr. LaFawn, any comments here?
I'm sorry, what did we do?
That's just simple stuff.
Sorry, I was caught up in a number here. Hold on a second, I'm
Just
catching
a
up.
simple, that's just a simple transfer, that's all.
Okay, so I think what we had is we had Cranberry Village, and then I think we also had EMS. The EMS amount, that has to do with the CARES Act, because here's the challenge that we have with CARES Act. We've submitted 7 reimbursements, we've received 2. There are items on some of those other 5 reimbursements that we don't know. They are COVID-related. The two-prong test was, is it an expense that would not have existed had the pandemic not occurred? Was it in your budget? If it's no, was not in your budget, and yes, it's due to the pandemic, it should be eligible. So I feel confident that everything we've submitted is COVID-related. However, we don't know how the county is going to opine on some of these items. And one of the ones that, and in general, we've had a plan for most of them. The EMS director did have one that he was concerned about, and even he's more concerned because EMS is self-sustaining. So if it's kicked out, what happens to him? Because he would have to absorb it in his budget, unlike any other town department. So to be safe, he has requested that this be on the town meeting warrant. I would say we'd probably, if we somehow get reimbursement between now and then, we'd just pass over this. So I think that would be our plan of attack. That's the EMS one. Cranberry Village, that's something that it's a situation we've had for a while now and may not exist in the future, but their revenues have been lagging, and we have a budget that has been built based on what is needed, but their revenues are lagging. They do have a significant sum of money, over $120,000 in their retained earnings. So this is to take money out of their retained earnings to pay for what we anticipate is going to be the shortfall in that account.
Thank you, Ms. Lemay. Is there a motion to recommend this Article 2?
Mr. Chair, could I just ask a question first?
Sure.
Mr. Germain, has the FinCom voted on any of these warrant articles?
No, we have not.
Okay, thank you. I'll make a motion to recommend Article 2.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion been made and second. Any further discussion? Mrs. Bogart.
Question. Okay, so that's a great explanation of the EMS vehicle. Do we know that the $24,550 being requested to transfer, is that the total cost of the vehicle? Or, okay, and so they are.
He did get it used.
Used, it's a used
So
vehicle, yes.
he's prepared to absorb it in case it does get denied?
Well, if it gets denied, this would be coming from, he would be taking it from his fund, but the reason why we have to do it this way is because the funds are in what's known as a receipts reserved for appropriation, so you can't just draw down from it at any given point. It's receipts reserved for appropriation. The only way to draw out is a town meeting vote. So if we were to not do this at town meeting, the amount that was taken out at the last April town meeting is enough just for his operations. It's not enough to cover this. He would have an issue. So this is just to take care of that. And again, we'll just pass over it. If the county, we do anticipate that we should have reimbursements by the end of March, so before town meeting. So if that's the case, we'll just pass over it and it's a non-issue.
Great.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor of recommending Article 2?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jen Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
And Sarah Hewen says aye. Passes unanimously.
Now, Madam Chair, do you want us to act on these articles, or do you want us, I have a note, a little message from Adam. I think there are some of these articles we haven't discussed yet at all, so we perhaps would like to hold a FinCom meeting to discuss those articles, but they don't involve the budget. So they're going to involve things like,
Article 3? I was actually going to ask you if you wanted to take a vote on these now, but if you'd rather,
it's up to the committee. If the committee would like to take a vote on Article 2, that's a pretty easy one. I do want to caution, and I'm not throwing Meg or Rick under the bus, this CARES Act money is a great thing. Problem is this CARES Act money comes in arrears. We've already spent it. So if for some reason, you'll tell me I'm wrong, huh?
I have an update, if that helps.
Okay, is it all going to be coming in?
I did speak to Tom O'Brien the other day, and I did express my concerns about this.
100%?
What's that?
100%?
What he said to me is he said reimbursements 3 and 4 will be in by the end of March, and then he said you should expect to receive the rest of it by June 30th.
Okay,
Yes.
should expect.
So fingers crossed.
Okay, but that was going to be my caveat. We spend the money, and then we hope we get it reimbursed, and what happens if we don't because we already bought it?
I have a second update.
Okay, we have another update.
I did reach out to my Department of Revenue rep because I've been working on the assumption that with any other situation, a deficit would have to be raised in the tax rate recap, and it's a hit to free cash. They really don't want us to overspend, so they double hit us. But because this is a different situation, and because we've done all of our due diligence, I've reached out to the county, we've been submitting our reimbursements timely. I just wanted to see if there was some concession. I've been waiting for guidance to come out from the Department of Revenue. I expected that would happen. We're in March, rolling into April. We're in the last quarter of the year. We need to be able to plan accordingly, because what you could do is you could do a revenue anticipation note that would get you through that period, rather not do any of that. So I did reach out to my Department of Revenue rep today to say, what is the situation? This is what we've got. We have 7 reimbursements. We've received 2. We're promised the rest of it. But what do I do if I have expenses between now and June 30th, knowing that the chances of us getting reimbursement are not very good? He has elevated it to the director, so I should find out what that answer will be. Because I think at this particular point, going into the last quarter, we just need a plan of attack.
If I could also bring up, the end of this past fiscal year, we were in the same situation without any guidance, and that's why we had some reimbursements prepared before June, but we didn't submit them until July, specifically for that purpose, because we didn't, and Meg was concerned that we would have issues, end-of-year issues with free cash certification, with reimbursements that hadn't been received yet. So we thought it would be wise to actually request reimbursement in July, the beginning of the next fiscal year, so that we wouldn't have that issue to deal with. And as you can hear from Meg, that's still a question mark at this date. So.
Just wanted everybody to be aware of it so that we're not shocked by it if, God forbid, it happens. I don't anticipate it's going to happen either, but it would be terrible to have it happen and say, geez, nobody knew.
Well, I mean, I think that the concern, and I think from the Department of Revenue's perspective, is they're going to say, you're going to receive money. So we're not concerned that whatever we have is the total deficit at year end. I know that they're not concerned that total deficit is what the town needs to raise. Our concern at this particular point, again, 7 reimbursements, 2 received. We don't have enough of a track record right now to know what it is that the county will accept and what they're going to reject. That's my concern at this particular point. I think in terms of the total amount, we could do, like I said, a revenue anticipation note. I think the Department of Revenue is going to be pretty understanding. It's just that last piece. What sort of things are they going to kick out, and what sort of things are they going to accept?
Thank you, Ms. Lemay.
So what does the board want to do with do you want us to do these articles that we can do, Pat, Adam, or do you want us to have a separate meeting and we can run through these articles with the town administrator and not take up the time so we can deal with the stuff we need to deal with?
I think some of them are pretty straightforward, like you said. Like Article 2 is pretty straightforward. We could probably take some action on that. Whereas Article 3, this is the first time we're seeing it. So, have the discussion tonight, learn a little bit more about the specifics, and then digest it a little bit and address it at a future meeting.
Okay, awesome. Make a motion for Article 2.
So I'd like to make a motion to recommend to town meeting Article 2 as written in the warrant.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to recommend Article 2 as written in the warrant. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
You have to have a roll call vote.
Do it that way? Do a roll call vote, starting with you, Adam.
Adam Holmes says aye.
Pat?
Pat Maha, aye.
Beth Snyder, aye.
Ellen Germain, aye.
Tony Macrina, aye.
Greg Boudreau, aye.
Bill Cullum, aye.
Unanimous.
Thank you, Mr. Jermaine. Article 3, allocation of funds from fiscal 2021 free cash. To see if the town will vote to transfer from free cash in the amounts and for the purposes specified below. Mr. LaFawn?
Well, 2 thoughts on this. Number 1, I know the Finance Committee has seen these, but I don't think you have voted on these either, and
No,
some of
we
these
haven't.
are...
Adam would like to hold this
You
one
know,
off,
and
so
that's
we're
fine.
gonna abstain from
Some of
this.
these are still a little bit of moving targets, and I'm saying very little at this point. Most of these costs are fairly well identified. I will say that in my brief PowerPoint update, I did list some of these items that are of, significance, that to be aware of, or that have a significant impact on our free cash. So this isn't a surprise to anybody, but to the extent that we have time to further refine these, because some of the information was still, for instance, and this is discussed at a Finance Committee recently too, the North Carver landfill. Well, we have a contract with an engineering firm that includes two pieces. One is an amount we have in the budget, $60,000, and that amount is what we can expect to be the recurring fees, into Affinity, potentially, for testing wells and reporting. Some of the costs that we have in our contract with an engineering firm really should be one-year expenses. Presuming that during this coming fiscal year, we are done with the project, the water main project, so some of the testing and notification requirements won't be necessary. So we broke that piece out into a one-time appropriation through free cash, but that's still a moving target. We still have more information to get from our engineering firm. I will say at this point, that can really only go down. So I think it's a good number, but if that ends up being, 50, 40,000, I think that's certainly anything we don't have to use from free cash for some of these. I think it's okay that we can let these be refined a bit more. Obviously, my relief is that the budget recommendation is done. That's obviously the number one thing, because we have to have that posted 30 days in advance. The warrant and the recommendations on the warrant don't have that requirement. So to the extent that you want to give the Finance Committee and Meg and I a little more time to see how these develop, I certainly think that would be productive.
I'm fine with that. Is that what you'd prefer,
That
Mr.
is
Jermaine?
absolutely, yeah. We'd like to do that
Okay.
with several of these articles.
Okay.
But
And
like
the board's
Rick
okay
said,
with that?
We need to do the budget, because we wanted to do that for the 30 days. But the rest of this, the committee can start to think about it now. I'd like to do a meeting Monday night, next Monday. We can discuss this stuff if that works for you, Rick.
So 30 days is March 13th?
30 days is this Saturday.
Okay.
I will say, though, that there are articles following, operating budgets for enterprise funds. Those are actually part of the budget that has to be approved in advance. Is that correct? Am I, Meg, or am I being overly cautious? Article 4.
Article 4. So Article 4 is the budget, so your question is the other articles, do they impact Article 4?
Part B, are you talking about Part B?
Okay, yeah, the enterprise funds on the part B.
Yeah, that's the FY22
But
budget
that's
for.
already in the document. It's been approved.
Well, the document, this document, it's not part of,
I just want to make
it's
sure
not part of
that,
this document.
okay, I just want to make sure that when the board voted to approve the budget, that it includes these enterprise funds that have to be,
Well, I think that the question is, did the vote include that, though? Because do they need to vote this today? Yes.
Why don't we just vote it?
that's my
Why don't we just
concern,
vote
is
it?
that Part B.
Part B?
Yes.
Are we doing Article 3 first, please? That's the one we were discussing?
Have to vote on Article 3 tonight?
I think that's the one that
That has some changes.
we
that
agreed
may
to
happen.
defer until after the Finance
Okay.
Committee meets. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're doing Article 4, Part B.
Article 4, Part B.
I have no problem with
Let
that.
me just read that. That's Enterprise Funds, North Carver Water District FY22, Salary Expenses Capital Debt, North Carver Water District Betterments Debt Stabilization Fund, and Cranberry Village FY22, Salary Expenses Capital Debt. Is there a motion from the board and a second to discuss?
Motion to recommend Article 4, Part B.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Is there a discussion at all? Mr. LaFawn, anything new?
No.
Thank you. Any discussion from the board? Seeing none. Mr. Jermaine, is your committee voting for this?
We'll take up Part B. You guys go ahead and vote, and then we'll take it up. Does
Very
that work
well.
for you?
Thank you. Okay, there's been a motion and a second on Article 4, Part B, Enterprise Funds. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jen Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
And Sarah Hewen says aye. That passes unanimously to recommend Article 4, Part B. Article 5, unpaid bills.
You want us to do Part B?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, Alan, I beg your pardon.
I think there's an error on the recommendation side. I don't think the school committee gets into Part B. I think the school committee gets into Part A. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're part of the general budget. Mhm.
So school committee should be moved up to the recommendation line for Part A. Okay. Now, FinCom will take a motion.
I make
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Article 4, Part B as written in the warrant.
second.
Motion to recommend, sorry.
Motion made, seconded to recommend Article 4, Part B, for the enterprise funds as written in the warrant. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Adam?
Adam Holmes says aye.
Pat?
Pat Maher, aye.
Beth Southern, aye.
Alan Jermaine, aye.
Tony Macrina, aye.
Greg Boudreau, aye.
Bill Cullum, aye.
Passes unanimous.
Thank you, Mr. Jermaine.
Thank you.
Article 5 is unpaid bills. To see if the town will vote to transfer from available funds the following unpaid bill. Invoice from Solaire America, $1,083.06, to be paid from the North Carver Water District retained earnings. Solaire America is the company that has the solar panels up on Route 44 by the coal property. And the coal property, of course, is where the North Carver Water District well is. And they are helping to, they give their energy to our well, the well house up there, in part.
If I could just point out for the newer people, any bill from the prior fiscal year, the ending last June 30th, can't be paid unless it's approved specifically by town meeting by a 9/10 vote. That's why you see something that's seemingly small in the, in the context of what we're talking about money-wise, but it's a state requirement that unpaid bills from a prior fiscal year are voted separately and at a 90% vote.
Thank you, Mr. LaFawn. Is there a motion to approve Article 5, or to recommend Article 5?
Motion to recommend Article 5.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Is there a second?
Second that.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Any further discussion?
Yeah.
Mrs. Bogart?
I think you answered my question was, what is Solar America? So,
They're a solar
So-
company out of Philadelphia.
so those solar panels up, the ones on Route 44,
They belong to Solaire America.
they belong to them, but we're buying energy from them?
No, they're giving us energy.
Okay, so then what is the $1,000 bill for?
You'd have to ask the finance department.
Okay.
So we do pay Solaire for the generation, so the energy that's generated, we pay them for it, and then what happens is the town then sells it back, and we get net permitting credits. So then what happens is those credits get applied to town, well, a chunk of it goes to the North Carver Water District electricity, but then there's so much that's generated, we actually have extra that goes to other town electricity bills.
Thank
So
you,
we
ma'am.
purchase it, and then we get permits, and it goes credits onto our electric bills.
Because a bunch of those panels are like gone or broken or missing.
They
Yeah.
belong to Solaire America.
So, I mean, is there a way to get that? if
Kevin
we're-
Tracy has been addressing that, because I know he had mentioned to me that there was an issue with them, but I know he's working with them on it.
Okay, yeah, because if we're paying them for something, it should work. So, okay.
Oh, it's working, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're a pretty reliable company, and
Okay.
they come down fairly often, I
Yeah,
think.
there's a bunch of busted ones.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Mr. Hoffman?
So what is the unpaid bill?
So the unpaid bill is the invoice for the generation of electricity from Solaire. So what happens is and I'm not sure if this is your question or not, is it exactly like what is the invoice for, or like what is an unpaid bill?
No, what is this invoice for, this unpaid bill?
This is, so it must have been, I don't know if it was May or June, because I will alert people at the end of the fiscal year, like, hey, monitor your budgets. If you have something that is a monthly bill, see if you've paid 12 payments. Or if, when you start to round that corner into the end of the fiscal year, monitor your purchases, make sure you have the invoice by July 15th, because that's our last warrant for the previous fiscal year, and if not, you need to encumber the funds. Sometimes things slip through the cracks. This must have been probably like a May or a June bill that got overlooked, so now we have to pay them, and it is for whatever electricity was generated from those solar panels.
Okay, thank you.
It's a pretty good deal, if you think about it.
Yeah.
The long and short of it, Rick put it much more succinctly, it's an electric bill.
Pretty modest one, however. So is there any more discussion? Thank you. All in favor of recommending Article 5?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jim Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye. Passes unanimously to recommend Article 5. Article 6, capital improvement budgets.
Do you want us to do that?
Oh, I keep forgetting. I beg your pardon. Finance Committee.
I make a motion to recommend to town meeting Article 5, unpaid bills.
I second the motion. Adam Holmes seconds.
Motion made and seconded to propose Article 5, unpaid bills, as written in the warrant. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Adam Holmes says aye.
Pat Maha, aye.
Beth Salter, aye.
Ellen Germain, aye.
Tony Macrina, aye.
Greg Boudreau, aye.
Bill Cullum, aye.
Passes 7-0, unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jermaine. Article 6, capital improvements budget. To see if the town will vote to transfer from the capital and debt stabilization fund the sum of $3,532,294 for the following purposes and for the purchase of related equipment and supplies. Mr. LaFawn.
I don't know, I would, have you already, I can't recall if the Finance Committee's taken a vote on this. I can't remember, Alan, if you want.
This is the issue. We have not taken a vote, we have had a discussion. The biggest issue is there is no capital outlay committee. And this is typically capital outlay stuff that then comes back to FinCom that then gets proposed, and then the select board makes the recommendation, and that's the process. Because there's a lot of money here. So FinCom took it up this year, but we did not entertain a vote. Correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, I believe we decided we would hold off until tonight to discuss this with the select board because it was very important to the FinCom that there be full transparency on this. We didn't want it to look like we were trying to circumvent our responsibility by jumping the gun. Because
That's exactly right.
We weren't
We
trying
didn't want to step on toes of capital outlay or the select board, and wanted to have a dialogue about the capital improvement budget and all the items that were requested. We did discuss it with individual department heads when they came in to talk to us. We asked them about their budget requests, their capital requests, got a little bit more insight from them on what's important and why. But we didn't want to have any preliminary discussions until we had a joint meeting with the select board, given the fact that the capital outlay committee most likely won't be discussing this as traditionally is done.
So, if I may, Madam Chair?
Certainly, Mr. Jermaine.
If we could just, and very briefly, I'll just give you a quick rundown on what the departments we've talked to on this and what the bottom line is to make it easy.
That would be good, thank you.
Starting with electric consumption, that was pretty self-explanatory, so we didn't get all into the weeds on that. The aerial bucket truck. I went to Dave Siedentoff, I went to John Woods, and I said, tell me about your bucket truck. Because originally this number was, I believe, $250,000. It is now $200,000, and it's expected to come in the 175s. They have an old bucket truck that they use literally every day. It hangs the banners, it cuts down trees, they fix the light bulbs and the poles, so forth. And so somebody's in that bucket truck. And I also found out that when the DPW is not using the bucket truck, the fire department usually is, because they use it also. It's approaching its life cycle, where you take your life in your hands getting into it. And now that involves liability and so forth and so on. So John explained to me that this was necessary. This was just necessary. And whether they'll probably auction the old one off. So They did not buy a diesel, they bought a brand-new Ford, or they'd like to buy a brand-new Ford. With a gas engine, they can't, this is what I mean about department heads. They couldn't justify the $10,000 additional cost for the diesel when they sat back and figured, we can buy a gas engine, which our mechanic can fix, as opposed to buying a brand-new diesel pickup truck, which has to go back to the dealership so they can plug it in. So this is the department responsibilities. The current bucket truck is 22 years old. I've seen it. I'm not afraid of heights. I wouldn't get in, but that's me. So, that being said, library mechanical replacement, this is a sore spot with me, only from the angle of, I've been in the attic. And this is the price we pay, and I laugh at it when I say this is the price we pay for low bid. I had no idea when Dave Seidenthoff, and I was in the heating business for 20 years, when Dave Seidenthoff took me up into that attic, we climbed a ship's ladder to get up there, and it was room, crawl over ductwork, crawl in between wood, room, and so on and so on. The only way that stuff's coming out of there is with no roof on the building. So it's absolutely truthful when he says this is a ridiculously expensive project to put back what we have. This money is
Really for engineering purposes.
for engineering
Yeah,
purposes, to look into what's going to be split systems, that's going to avoid dealing with anything up in the attic. Not using the current air handlers. 3 of the condensers on the ground are already not working. So the HVAC in the library has to be updated. It's on natural gas for heat, which runs up through those units in the ceiling, as well as the AC, which is not working with those units in the ceiling. And the whole thing is just, you know, it's 20-some-odd years old, and it's old technology, but was never put in so you could service it, which is bizarre to me, but that's the truth. So this is for an engineering study. Rick may want to give a little more insight on what the potential down the road is for this, but ultimately, I think it's going to be something we're going to have to do, because there's no AC in the second floor of the library, so we have space you can't use. So we had no problem with the engineering study. Exterior siding and replacement, that seems to be, we have 120,000 so far, Meg, on the
Correct.
painting in that account.
Right.
Dave got a price, I believe, from Restorex of $200,000 to re-side the Homosote on Town Hall, which is Homosote, so it's trash, with the new cement siding, which is the same siding they're using in the police station and what they've used in the fire station. It's colored all the way through. This does not include, this $80,000 with the 120 we have in the account. We've set aside already for painting. There's money, 3 years we put money away. That will cover that, but it will not cover the trim. This was just to do the siding. Now, obviously, there's going to be some trim that needs to be done and stuff like that, but Dave said he would address that. He's looked at what's pulling away from the building. He does not believe that it has gotten down to the sill and there's any structure behind the siding that's going to need to be replaced. He doesn't think so. Do we know? Of course you don't know when you pull siding off. I did my roof and I found 3 sheets of plywood had to be replaced. So we don't know. But this was their best guess. So we were okay with that. The Jaws of Life, I went right to the fire department. We go right to the chief, who tells you what's what. The Jaws of Life that they currently have they're 5,000-pound Jaws of Life. The new cars are being made with a boron tube. I got a whole education. Going up in the A pillar, the B pillar, and the C pillar. You can't cut the roof off the car with the current Jaws of Life, because the boron tube requires a stronger set of jaws. So the replacement Jaws of Life are for 10,000-pound jaws that will cut that tube. What has to happen right now is guys say, hold on a minute and go get a Sawzall and start cutting. Now, it doesn't sound like that should be a big deal. And my answer to the chief was, until that's your wife, mother, child in the car that's bleeding, and then you can't get that roof off fast enough. So we were okay with that. They are going to continue to use the old ones, which will be backups, because they don't throw anything out. Fire Station 2 and 3 interior improvements. This was $25,000 was requested out of the capital fund for appliances and materials which the firefighters, on their own time, at no charge to the town, will update the two buildings. We didn't think that was a big deal. Obviously, you already know that the reserve account has funded the air cascade unit, which is what they use to refill their oxygen tanks and their bottles for the fires. That was put in for COVID money, CARES Act. We don't,
That's on reimbursement 3. We should know by the end of March.
well, hopefully we'll know by the end of March. If they choose to, we get the reimbursement, then obviously they'll put that money back into the reserve account. That was the deal. The approval was pending denial from the CARES Act. But in any case, that cascade unit's been ordered, should be here in, I think, another couple of weeks, 3 weeks or something like that. They need one. This is what they need to put on and refill their tanks to go into somebody's house. This current unit is now leaking oil, which means it could contaminate the air supply that the firefighters are breathing, and that's completely unacceptable. So, police and fire, we had no problem with. Cruiser replacements, I sat with the chief, and this struck me because the chief said, we're running 4 Crown Victorias, which they haven't made in, I think, 6 or 8 years. And these things are frontline cars. Because he assigns the vehicles, which is probably why they've lasted so long, because one guy gets it. They're not slip seating, where, you drive it today, and then you're driving the same vehicle tonight, and then you're driving it on the next shift. It's an individual car assigned to an officer, and that's the best way, even in the trucking business, that's the best way to have the vehicle last the longest. But he's got 4 Crown Victorias that are costing us more to maintain than they're worth. They're asking for 2 cruisers, and I still remind this board, and I'll remind people at town meeting, this is a chief who drives the former police chief's car that we bought at a bargain sale from Marshfield. He's never asked for a new vehicle for himself. He doesn't ask for new vehicles except to put out on the front line. So I guess I'm advocating that we said okay. Townwide technology, I don't really understand, but it is what it is. District-wide curriculum upgrade, modern education, that's a Scott thing. The 71 passenger buses, that's going to be a Scott thing. We're okay with it now. The classroom, cafeteria, auditorium lighting, athletic equipment, that was all part of the school's proposals. We didn't have a problem with really any of it. Frankly, as presented, I don't think that the capital outlay committee, that the finance committee had a problem with the capital outlay totals of $3,532,294. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Vice Chairman.
So,
here it comes. I know that's so.
So, by itself, no. I don't. There are things on here that make sense, that have to be done, should be done in a timely manner. It makes sense to do them as soon as they can. The concerns I've raised in previous FinCom meetings, and the one I hope to discuss here tonight with the Select Board, was sort of twofold. It's two-pronged anyway. The first being, it concerns me a little bit to utilize almost all of the funds available in the Capital and Debt Stabilization Fund in this article, not knowing what the future holds. It seems like this is a year where we might want to be a little cautious. There's about a $72,000 surplus between what's available and what we're utilizing. I'd feel a little bit more comfortable if that number was a little bit higher. So my sort of general sense is, if there are items here that are not time sensitive and could wait, I do think it makes sense to potentially consider that and discuss that in more detail, because it would be nice to have a little bit of a cushion, number one, in case some of the CARES Act money doesn't get reimbursed, and number two, in case there's some sort of unforeseen capital needs later in the year, we would have more available to make that to be able to meet that demand, right? The other thing is Article 8 in the warrant this year is the Plymouth Street water line extension and the money needed to fund that project. And I think it's something that we should discuss and consider potentially funding that project or a portion of it out of this capital and debt stabilization this year, as opposed to on a long-term bond. I was less optimistic about being able to make a significant impact on that project when I thought the project was going to cost significantly more than what's currently proposed. So based on the fact that Article 8 has a number that I think could be absorbed by the Capital and Debt Stabilization Fund and the money that's left over in the Capital and Debt Stabilization Fund for FY21, I do think it makes sense for us to have a discussion tonight about possibly funding that project out of this Capital and Debt Stabilization Fund in FY22, as opposed to in a long-term bond. And if that means one or two of these items listed in Article 6 gets pushed to FY23, and it's not as time sensitive as that water line is, in my opinion, then I think it is financially prudent for us to consider it, discuss it, and possibly make that change. So that's the caveat I put on where I stand with Article 6.
So, thank you, Mr. Holmes. If I may ask you, have you considered which which capital improvement item that you might recommend not funding this year in order to do what you're suggesting?
So I think, in the weeks and months that we've had to look at this list, I think there's certain things there that I personally might feel are ones that could be impacted, but I also don't think it makes sense to discuss that until we've decided as a board that we want to fund the project with capital and debt stabilization funds now, as opposed to bonding the money. So where there's $470,000 in the current capital and debt stabilization fund that's available from FY21, that would fund all of Article 8 as it's currently proposed. But again, I think it makes sense for us to seriously consider not funding all of these capital requests in a year where we really don't know what the future holds. I just don't think it makes sense to be overly optimistic and assume that all of our forecasts and our projections are going to hit and that we're going to have all this money. And then that also, again, gets into a longer discussion about whether we want to bond the money or not and what the implications of that are. So the short answer to your question, Sarah, is I have some ideas, but if either committee or both committees aren't really interested in paying this out of a capital budget, it doesn't make sense to start identifying what we would cut.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Holmes.
So, Madam Chair?
Just one sec, I wanted to ask Mr. LaFawn, or do you defer?
I will defer to Alan
Okay,
first,
Mr.
if you don't mind, and then I can be
Sure,
happy.
Mr. Jermaine?
This is the only place that Adam and I differ. No disrespect, Adam, we had this discussion already. If we were I have several problems with the water line. One is that the bid that went out is to put in a dead-end water line connected to nothing. So we have a number that gives us a water line that nobody's connected to and can't use. So we don't have a number of completion. We don't know what the bottom line's going to be.
Right.
So yes, we can put the water line in.
Can I just explain to people that, all we have right now is that
Right.
line. We don't have the tie-in numbers, the
tie-in.
cost of the tie-in.
So
there will be
yes,
tie-ins.
we can put the line in the street and we can write that check out of the Capital and Debt Stabilization Fund, but then we don't know what the tie-ins are going to be. I spoke with the health agent, and not only do the houses that get tied in, we also have to decommission their wells. We don't know what that's going to cost either. So by the time all is said and done, and I'm no one to throw numbers, could it be another $200,000 to tie all these houses in? Could it be 250? Could it be 150? Will there be houses that say, you can tie me in, but I don't want you to? I want my well, because they can't have both. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. There's also no asphalt in that bid. John Woods tells me that Plymouth Street will get repaved under some Chapter 90 funds as a paving project, so that's fine, but I don't know if we have to kick in money on that kind of a deal or not. So there are some unknowns, and I'm fully in favor of put the water line in and tie everybody that needs to be tied into it. We don't have that number. So I proposed, and I had this conversation with Rick, and I'm not a super big fan of bonds, but I proposed that no matter what that number come out to be, it would be too small to bond. So why wouldn't we try to hit a home run, if you will? Interest rates are super low, preserve our capital money, bond the HVAC for the library and get it done in 1 year, so we're not playing games with this stage, that stage. Next year we'll do part B, C, D, and get the town hall done, exterior trim, and we're done. Because a couple of years from now, we're gonna have somebody knocking on our door saying, geez, the library looks terrible, we gotta paint it. Well, where's that money gonna come from? And there will always be something coming tomorrow, God forbid. We're sitting in what may be tomorrow. It won't be tomorrow, but it could be 5 years, 10 years. We get a big boom in houses being built. This may not be big enough. God only knows. We know that Old Colony is looking to add to their curriculum with possibly a building. We're going to have to foot some of that bill. I'm more in favor of put money in the capital and debt stabilization fund and leave it there for now. We have a marijuana agreement that's going to fund some of the capital and debt stabilization. We have solar contracts that a third of that money is going to be funding into that account also. I think you could pay this bond out of that, and you'd preserve your cash. You'd get the 3 big projects done. But this is only one person with an opinion. And that opinion is very different than my vice chairman's
There'd be
opinion.
2 people with an opinion.
That makes that 3, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, Alan and I have had a lot of conversation about this.
Sorry, Adam.
No, I mean, because, well, I think it's actually kills 2 birds with 1 stone, because to the extent that you,
3 birds.
I'll mention 2, if there's a third one, you can,
Oh, the town hall.
oh, no, I mean, in terms of, the 2 birds I'm talking about, Alan, is it gets projects done quicker, and it preserves cash that's projected to be spent this year from the capital stabilization fund. And one of the concerns I had, even going back a ways, was, it's responsible to try to save money over a period of time for certain things, but we have a, second floor of a library that's barely usable when it gets hot. So I don't want to wait 3 years, because by the time you have enough in the fund, and by the time you go out and do the project, and you're now talking 3 fiscal years. So I like the idea, and again, we've discussed it, let's go out and we need to get this done. Okay, the town spent millions of dollars on a building, we should be able to use a second floor.
Right.
And I don't think we're talking $3 million with the whole, I don't think we're anywhere near that number for the whole project. I think we're in the 2.
Yeah, and as you know, we opened the bids the other day. I know the board's been informed
I was shocked.
of about 300, the low bid's 353,000. We don't know, it's being analyzed for.
That's for the Plymouth Street water line?
I'm sorry, yes, I just took a U-turn on you, Sarah. We don't know if that's going to be the lowest responsible bidder, but we do know that we have some really good bids on the underside of 400,000. So, one or more of those are definitely going to be, responsible. But as Alan said, we don't know just yet what it's going to cost to tie in those homes that are impacted by their wells, contaminated wells. We're also in a situation where, even though we're testing 19 wells, there's only a few of those that actually have demonstrated any contamination. So we really don't have any reason to believe the town would need to be in a fiscally required to tie any of those other homes in. So, but this is a little bit of a finesse issue here, because I think we're going to obviously have to our prime engineering is getting us estimates on tie-ins. That, whatever that is, will have to be added to I'm going to round it up to 400,000 just for the sake of discussion. Will have to be added to that $400,000. In addition to that, we will have to discuss, how much of a buffer we want in there for the other locations that may, we'll say, convince us, or we may find, wisdom in putting money aside for those, to tie those in also. Now, I don't know what that number is. We know we have 4 or 5 that we need to be doing. Whether or not we have some funding in there that would tie in half of the others if necessary, and I'm just picking numbers right here. The bottom line is it's more than $400,000. When you take that number in these other projects, we're talking about a fairly sizable amount, not an overwhelming amount, that the debt and interest could be taken out of our capital stabilization fund over a period of time, rather than, try to do these over many years. But we obviously know we have to do the Plymouth line, Plymouth Street line. We have to provide for tie-ins. We don't know exactly what that number is going to be today, even though we've opened the bid for the line itself. And I think it's hard to try to build these things into a capital plan when there's still so many unknowns. I think that's difficult. And to the extent that that upsets the entire, spending plan right now, I just think it's difficult. I hear what Adam's saying, and I think it would really would be helpful if we could do that, but, you've seen the other costs here, these other projects, and it would be very difficult to figure out which ones of these could wait or should wait. That would be a very difficult decision by everybody, so.
Absolutely.
And if indeed we do go out, first of all, we'd have to rearrange the warrant a little bit to provide the town the opportunity to borrow. Right now, the library and the town hall projects are in there as an appropriation from this fund. There isn't an article that authorizes a borrowing for that. There is an article in there that authorizes borrowing for Plymouth Street. So it may be wise for us to update that to provide an option for the town to borrow for those projects too, if that's what the town wishes to do. And as I said, that would free up some of the cash in here that was anticipated to be expended. And that may serve, one of the goals or one of the concerns Adam has, because these projects have to get done one way or the other. And ultimately, everything on this list has to get done within a year or two. So it's not a perfect situation, but I do think that by bundling these into a bond to be paid through the Capital Stabilization Fund, it might actually address a couple of these issues. That's my thought at the moment, and
So by bundling the library mechanical replacement, the town hall exterior siding, and the Plymouth Street water line extension.
correct. The challenge with the library is we don't really have a great number yet for what that project cost could be, so we're going to have to get on that PDQ. One of the concerns that Dave had, Dave Siedentopf, and why he suggested we get some professional assistance was so that we would have a number that he would feel comfortable with. But on the other hand,
It has to be engineered, there's no doubt.
true,
has
but I
to
think try to get a good cost of what engineering as well as a construction cost might be, we can do our best to accomplish that before a town meeting. But it is not something that we had intended to do, but I think it provides an opportunity if we can get good numbers on our library project.
And we already have $120,000 set in the reserve for painting the town hall. We have some money set aside already for the HVAC. So it's not like we're starting from zeros. This either remains in the capital and debt stabilization fund, or it can go to reduce some of that if you wanted to use some of that money. If this was only the water line, I agree with Adam 1,000%. Why borrow? Just pay it. But I think that there's too many other things, and I think ultimately, between the town hall, and we don't know what's behind the siding, and the HVAC, and we don't have any idea what that's going to come into, I think that may back us into a corner of having no choice but to bond, and now we've spent the money for the water line, so that's no longer in our savings account, and we got to borrow money anyway.
Yeah, well, that's my concern as well. Mr. Townsend?
Thank you. I also think the bonding is a good idea. I think it's something Mr. Germain and I have spoken about several times, but on a greater issue, I guess, there's a number of articles here that I don't think the FinCom has voted on yet, and I just wonder if it might be a good idea. I would like to get the FinCom's recommendation on those articles. I just wonder if perhaps we should consider tonight tabling the remaining articles that require a FinCom vote until a future meeting when we have their input. And I guess that would be my suggestion at this point.
So
And I
I'm
would-
going to have to ask Mr.
I'm sorry, just agree to the extent that there are some of these that are still little moving targets, and a week or two could make a difference. And I know I've pointed out one or two already, so, I mean, I think we're all on the same page, but to the extent that we can hone these down as much as we, humanly possible, I don't think is a bad idea. And were you going to tap me on the shoulder?
I wanted to ask a
Okay.
question. I thought I heard at the beginning of the meeting that these money articles needed to be voted 30 days before town meeting?
The budget.
Just the budget?
Just the budget,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, capital can be voted technically not at all and can be just voted at town meeting.
So, Madam Chair, would you want a motion for that, or is that something we can?
We can vote on Article 6.
Well, I'd like that. In all honesty, I'd like to table Article 6 until we have a recommendation from the FinCom.
The Finance Committee has no objection.
You have no objection to tabling it?
No.
Very well. Is there a second to table Article 6?
Can I ask a question before we table it?
Absolutely not. Yes, of course. Mr. Hoffman.
I just had a quick question on the townwide technology that Mr. Jermaine passed over so quickly. What is that?
Exactly. Now you know why I passed it over so quickly.
Exactly.
That is actually for, we've consolidated a couple of things, departments, town and school, one of which is DPW, so now it's the O&M, operations and maintenance, the other one is IT. So that money is for the IT department, that would be under Stephen Mahoney, and it is money that's available to both town and school. So it's essentially our IT department.
So IT improvements?
Scott, I mean, on the school side, what is it?
Mr. Neef, could you use the microphone? I'm sorry. We just want to be able to hear you. People at home.
Well, I don't have my list.
Sorry, Scott.
Sorry. Can I take it away from this? Sorry, guys. So I know 100,000 is dedicated towards Chromebooks for the middle high school. So the Chromebooks we currently have were what we bought, we originally.
I'm sorry, it's for what?
It's for Chromebooks at the middle
Oh,
high school.
thank you.
Actually, really district-wide. So when we originally purchased Chromebooks to go to one-to-one for our students in grades 7 through 12, that was 5 years ago. So we currently have 400 Chromebooks that are basically end of life. So we need to replace those 400 Chromebooks. So that's 100,000 of that budget. There are other expenses there that are actually town-wide expenses. There's replacement of computers which I can't speak to what they're replacing at Town Hall or throughout the district, because remember, it's a town-wide department, so it supports all town departments in terms of technology, so capital expenses, purchases. So the big item on the school side is the 100,000 for the Chromebooks.
Okay, thank you.
If you give me a second, I can get a more detailed list. I don't know if you want a more detailed list.
No, that's fine for me.
Also, just so you know, we should table it and just maybe to expand a little bit, just to make you feel warm and fuzzy. Next year is 369. The following year is 776. This is in the capital plan. So it's a big number. This year, next year, and the following year is a crazy number. And I'm not really sure as to why it's so big way out then. But I do remember the Chromebooks. There was also something about bringing cables down to here.
Right, so there's a whole piece of, in terms of town-wide technology, there's wireless access points actually not going into the school, I believe, going into other town departments, so there's a section of it, I don't know the exact number, that's going to purchase new access points, because the access points are also getting close to end of life. Replacing access points are very important because it allows all these devices to get on the internet, even though we were unable to this evening. So it allows X number of devices to get on in a certain area. So if your access points are old, then what will happen is if so many devices try to hit that access point, people will start dropping, they won't be able to maintain their internet in both the school setting and in town offices. So I know that access points town-wide are part of it. And then it's also, the other part of it that's a big piece of it is, which is also town-wide, is supporting our 2 gig broadband. So as part of the new elementary school project, the elementary school became the hub of all of our internet services within the town. And all town buildings are hooked up through that building. Again, I don't have the technical expertise to explain all the important pieces of that, but we basically now throughout the town have 2 gig service, and the town and the capital budget helps support that 2 gig service in terms of maintaining that internet connection for all town departments, just not the school department.
Great, thanks.
But I can't give you numbers on those specific items. I know the Chromebook's 100,000.
Thank you,
We'll
Superintendent.
dig more into it, so you'll
Yeah.
have a better understanding when we dig more into it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Then I guess my other question, part Q, the 1.8 million, which is basically almost half of this budget.
Yeah, that's the debt and interest budget. That's the fixed long-term debt that's paid out of this account, too.
And not that I'm going to put Stephen Mahoney on the spot. And obviously, we talked about Stephen earlier this evening, but I think it it might make sense to have him, if we want a real drill down on the townwide technology budget, to have Stephen
That'd
come
be
and present
great.
on that.
That would be great. That would be good.
And I'm sure he'd be more than willing to do so.
I'm sure he would not, but okay.
But just
Well, I
see,
gotta-
I'm sorry, that.
Mr. LaFawn.
No, that big number,
Guys back on?
to Jim's question, the 1.6 million of it is the debt that the town has issued for police, fire station, some tankers, trucks, as well as the middle school, high school project. So that's the fixed debt we have for those projects.
All right, thank you, because I think the big thing that I feel, and a lot of people that I've been talking to feel, with the pandemic that's going on, and everyone has to tighten their belts a little bit. We just want to make sure everybody is tightening their belt and not, everyone puts a wish list out, and like Alan said, there's a lot, there's this fluff and everything. We just want to kind of make sure everything's, I won't say bare to the bone, but as tight as possible. If we have to kind of wait another year for certain things, then so be it. But I'm not a big debt person. I think I'd like to pay for everything if we have the cash now in the stabilization fund, so. But I'll obviously wait to hear from everybody in a little more in-depth, but
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Townsend, and then Mrs. Booker.
I just wanted to say, I think that's why it's important that we maybe don't take a vote tonight, put this off a little bit, is it sounds like we need a little more information. I think it would be important that we get that information from the FinCom before we take a vote on these. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, and I if I may, I think my hope in tonight's dialogue was to get some thoughts from everybody with respect to, to sort of discuss it and dissect the issues, right? And analyze what we think is the best course of action. I mean, some of the comments that have been made since I last spoke, I've heard a lot of, we don't know, it's unknown, we're not sure, it could be everything from the water line to the library project. There's a lot of unknown into each one of these projects. And as such, I do think it's financially prudent and conservative for us to spend a little bit more time to really think about what's necessary and where we can maybe save some money so that we're making intelligent decisions here about how we're spending this money. I hate to spend all of this money in the capital and debt stabilization funds and then bond what we need for all these projects when there's as many unknowns as there are. And that's just related to the projects, never mind related to the forecasts that we've looked at. And so I think there's too many unknowns, and it makes sense to sort of have a conceptual discussion about, because I think this is a philosophical decision, and then based on the philosophical decision, you decide what financially needs to be done to make it happen. I don't think the best course of action is to figure out what you need financially and then go get it. I think instead it makes sense to philosophically decide what's the best way to fund it. And then based on what's available from a funding standpoint and what you want to hold on to or be cautious about from a funding standpoint, then you decide what gets paid for, right? What you decide to actually execute. That's my personal belief. In addition to that, I wanted to, if we could, get feedback from Meg, from the finance director, on where what her opinion is on the best way to handle this. I think she's, probably most equipped to answer the question, but I'm just curious what your sort of initial thoughts are, Meg, on how this should be funded.
Well, I'm sorry, but before we do that, didn't we have a motion and a second to table?
To table, and really, there's no discussion with it, and we're okay with that. I think that's something we'll invite Meg to do at a FinCom
Correct.
meeting. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a motion and a second, so,
By the select
Was
board or
there
the
a second?
FinCom?
oh, maybe there wasn't a second.
Yes, there was. There was a second by Jim Hoffman. There was
Okay,
a
all right.
motion and a second to table
So, I mean, we can,
By the select board or the FinCom?
by the select board.
select board.
Okay.
Didn't you second, Mr.
No.
Hoffman? Okay, I beg your pardon.
Do we have to table this, or?
We don't have to, but Mark made a motion to table this.
He's right, it was not seconded, because Jim said I have a question before I
That's right.
second it.
That's my question, does it have to be tabled, or can we just skip it and wait to the meeting?
If you- I
Well,
don't think
that-
you need
that
a
would be
motion to
tabling
table.
it.
If you want to hold off until we've dealt with it.
Yeah,
that's-
that would be tabling it until we could discuss it further with the Finance Committee and the Finance Director.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. I think we've had enough discussion.
We have.
Just questions. They'll try to be brief. The townwide technology, why does that come from the town budget and not the school budget with the shared resources? What portion is paid by the school versus the town? Just refresh my memory.
That's going to have to be, Brad used to have all of that laid out, went to what bucket, so Ron may have it, Stephen Mahoney will definitely have it, but that, it is administered on the school side, so I do not have the details on that. I know that if, like, we needed to purchase a computer, we would check with Stephen Mahoney, he would check to make sure the resources are available, so it's really going to require talking to school department, probably Stephen Mahoney.
Okay, and then quick question. Adam, can you hear me? Adam Holmes? No?
I can, Jen.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Question, when you were speaking the first time, if you said that if this 3.5 million is spent, there'd be, did I hear you right? There'd only be $72,000 left in the account?
There's approximately $3.6 million that will be available in capital and debt stabilization revenue based on the revenue forecast. So of that 3.6 million, we're spending all except for $71,842.
Okay, and on that note, that is scary to me, so I look forward to seeing what FinComs comes back with, because based on that, I lean toward Adams, let's see what can be put off, because that's a scary low number, so thank you for that, Adam.
Well, we can take some of this out with.
Right, I think
Mr.
that,
LaFawn.
just two points. Number one, the amount that'll be left is going to be replenished. We have fixed income that goes into this account every year.
Every year.
So we're not going to spend it this year and only have $71,000 next year. This is replenished from amounts that otherwise would have been appropriated to debt service, as well as funds that have been identified and directed to this account every year, income to the town. So this will be replenished for next year's fiscal considerations. It's not like we only have $70,000 left for FY '23.
Let's let FinCom
Sure.
take this up.
Yeah.
Meg, would you get me the number that was put into this account this
Okay,
year for our meeting?
I would like to,
Yeah.
we've had a motion and a second. I think
Yeah.
we've discussed
Let's
this
move
enough.
that.
Could I have a vote, please?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jim Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
And Sarah Ewen says aye. That's to table Article 6.
I was going to say more, but you saved yourselves from me, so.
FinCom is fine with that.
Okay. I think before we move on, I'm going to ask for a 3-minute break or something.
Yeah. Article 7, we have not taken up at all.
Okay, I'm going to ask for about a
That
3-minute break.
sounds good to me.
Okay, thank you. We're back. So we have come to Article 7, which is Community Preservation Committee Report and Recommendations. I don't know how the board wants to move forward with this.
FinCom has not taken this up, Madam Chair.
And would you like to vote on it tonight as well, Mr. Chair?
I would actually like to know a little more about it.
Okay,
So I think we'd like to take this up at our next FinCom meeting.
okay, that sounds good. And how does this board feel about Article 7? Mr. Town?
Well, Madam Chair, just speaking for myself, we don't have recommendations from the Community Preservation Committee or the FinCom. So I would like to see those recommendations before we take action on it.
So is that a motion, Mr. Townsend, to table?
Motion to table Article 7.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second to table?
Sure, I'll second that one.
Thank you, Mrs. Bogart. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of tabling Article 7?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jim Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
And Sarah Hewen says aye to table Article 7 until we meet again. Article 8, Plymouth Street Waterline Extension. Mr. LaFawn?
I think, obviously, based upon our earlier conversation, this is something, obviously, that should be tabled. The only thing I would suggest is that this article should be amended to include the option to borrow for the library HVAC and town hall siding also, whether the town chooses to do it, but I think that the article needs to be updated to at least allow that, and we can collectively decide how we want to go with that, but the article
Okay.
needs to be amended.
Okay, so,
Which we'll do. Well,
okay.
Elaine will do very
so,
competently.
so
Chair?
your office will do that. Oh, sorry, Mr. Jermaine.
It's not a FinCom decision by any means, but I would suggest, I don't know if it's possible to put in a number, but I'd like to see this number from a FinCom standpoint get a little more realistic to the real number.
Oh, yes, I agree.
No, I agree, and that's why we were waiting for some estimate from Prime Engineering as
Yeah.
to what a tie-in will cost, something that we can project out, and based upon our...
This number's like fairy dust.
No,
right? Just like
I agree, but...
Yeah, no, we're
Right.
working on that, for
Sure.
sure, definitely. So to the Select Board, I'd like a motion, if I may, to table this article as well until we have a little bit more information.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Any further discussion? All in favor of tabling Article 8?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jim Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye. It's unanimous to table Article 8, which is not to mean Article 8 will not be on the warrant. It will be on the warrant. We just need more information. Article 9, permit conditions.
Madam Chair, since I'm
Yes.
the author, could I speak on this?
I'm sorry?
Since I'm the author, could I speak on this?
Oh, yes, let me, so let me just briefly explain this situation. A certain project came to the attention both of me and Mr. Jermaine, and we were going to make it specific to that type of project, which was a solar project. And then, at least on my part, it occurred to me that this hypothetical project, whatever it is, could pertain to a hypothetical project, say, on property hypothetically owned, controlled at the moment by the redevelopment authority. And so what it's saying is, sometimes projects are proposed on a landowner's land. The landowner doesn't own the project, and then it gets its permits, and then the person who owns the project sells it. And now the person who now owns the project has no clue what they're supposed to be doing, doesn't bother to ask. And Mr. Jermaine can finish that thought, because he actually came to me about it, and I offered to put it into an article form,
Madam Chair?
but it's all his fault. No.
If I could, just before you begin discussions, I believe this article may have some connection with a development going on that abuts my property. So I'm going to recuse myself from this article.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Townsend. And it actually isn't specific to that property, but it began with that one. So you're correct. I appreciate that. Mr. Jermaine.
Like every bylaw that we pass, it's always almost in arrears, and it's because something came up that caused us to say, wow, we can't let that happen again. So that's where laws come from. This particular instance, there was a project that was permitted, approved, passed by conservation, passed by planning, signed off on by the building department.
And the landowner was happy with it
And the
originally.
landowner had a contract for the project on one of his bogs, and then the company sold the paper. They sold all the goodies in the paper and made a boodle of money, and then XYZ company comes in, and they changed the drawing and didn't notify anybody. They just came in quietly thinking, my personal belief is they thought that Carver was Sleepy Hollow, and the bog owner was Joe Hillbilly, and nobody would notice. So now we have a project that is 90% done, and it is not what was originally approved by the planning board. It is what was approved by the Conservation Commission as it pertains to where the wetlands are, but there were no wetland socks put out, which was required. There was a whole lot of rules not followed. So this is designed to protect the landowner from someone who wants to come in and permit a project and then sell off the paper. The new company comes in. This requires that they first notify the town that, hey, guys, we're the new owner. The permits would be transferred then into their name. So, and they'd be brought back, not summoned, but brought back before the Conservation Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals if it's necessary, the Planning Board, so that the order of conditions and everybody's on the same page. Now, everybody knows I also sit on Conservation. At the suggestion of our new part-time building inspector, the last meeting we had, we physically signed, and the entire committee, this is our dedication from here on in, we will sign the top copy of every drawing that we approve, the main drawing, and then we'll initial every single page. So that will go in the packet, that instead of just the order of conditions. So that later on, when someone comes in and says, oh, this is the drawing, we can look at it and say, no, no, this is the drawing, this bears our signature, that's not what this is, you can't do that. So the whole idea is to prevent what has happened with this particular solar project from happening again. We think it was very unfair. We think that there is not one person I've spoken to yet within the town does not think that this individual was taken advantage of. And our sole purpose in this town is to protect the interests of the landowners, the residents, and the taxpayers. That's our job.
And because I have heard some not really dissent, but some questions about, you know, why are we doing this for this one landowner? This is not being done for one landowner, and that's how the idea began. But there could be serious consequences for any project. I mean, you know, let's face it. I mean, the project the RDA is negotiating right now is a huge project, and it could apply to that. It could apply to really any project that comes in. So that's the explanation, and that's it. Is there a motion to recommend this article from the Select Board?
Can I ask a question first?
Yes, Mrs. Bogart.
I guess I was under the impression that we were just going to take up the articles that involve the Select Board and the Finance Committee tonight. So if there is a way to put off ones that would just require our vote till our next meeting, I know I would love to have Mr. Belbin involved.
Sure.
So, and in the sake of respect for everybody, they don't need to watch us vote on our stuff.
That's true. We have time for that, correct?
She's right.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine. So is that a motion to table this article?
Yeah, I would make a motion to just move forward with the articles that require votes of both the Select Board and the Finance Committee.
So that's a motion to table Article 9.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded to table Article 9. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Jen Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye. Article 9 is tabled. Article 10, is there a motion to table Article 10?
I'll make a motion to table Article 10.
Is there a second?
Jim seconded.
Oh, I couldn't hear him, sorry. There's been a motion and a second to table. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Jen Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
Mark Townsend says aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye. Article 10 is voted to table, 4-0. Is there a motion to table Article 11?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Is there a second?
I'll
I'll second.
Motion been made and seconded to table Article 11. All in favor?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jen Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye. Article 11 has been tabled.
Looking ahead on these, Sarah,
Oh,
just a quick
Article
look
12.
ahead, does look like there isn't anything else here. I know, I know that the Finance Committee still has to review and make a recommendation on the updated Finance Committee bylaw that's being proposed, as well as the
Okay.
capital
Oh, all
outlay.
right.
So I think that to the extent that, to Jen's point, these are things that the Finance Committee will be looking at, but we're not prepared to void.
With the exception of Article 12 and 13.
I'm sorry?
the exception of what?
With the exception of Article
I'm sorry.
12 and 13. Other than that, we have no other business in the rest of the warrant.
Okay. Then
So you do want to discuss 12 and
I would like
13?
just so that the select board, we don't have to go through this again, so you can get an idea of where I'm coming from on these two particular
Okay.
bylaw changes.
Please, go ahead, Mr. Jermaine.
Article 12 deals with the Finance Committee bylaw change, which I know was one that the Select Board had looked into in the very beginning. And the proposed change is that we take out the word Council on Aging. So it's a registered voter of the town be eligible for appointment of the Finance Committee. We remove the Council on Aging, except that no elected member of the Select Board. Now, I'll get into why I say this. We remove appointed town officer. We leave in regular town employee, a person hold a position of financial responsibility for the town. No member of special committee be authorized. And then for the financial responsibility shall be defined as a resident hired to perform or consult legal, accounting, or assessing duties for the town and be paid for his services as a contractor. Now, the reason that I've proposed this bylaw change, and thank you for including it in the warrant, and the reason that I'm specifically excluding the Select Board is because the Select Board is really the executive administrator of the town. You guys are the bottom line. You're the CEOs. So it would be improper to have any one of a member of the Select Board sit on the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee, as we sit here, is a recommendation committee. It's an oversight committee. We're the watchdog. But we can't do anything. The only money that we can spend is the $25,000 in grant applications that was granted us that authority by town meeting, and the $125,000 that is granted us by town meeting to put in the reserve account for the sole purpose of a department head coming to the Finance Committee to cover a shortfall in their particular budget or an emergency expense. So we can't decide that, well, FinCom, wants to spend $400,000 out of the Capital and Debt Stabilization Fund and put a new roof on the library. All in favor say aye, and Meg writes the check. That doesn't work that way. We don't have that authority to do that. We can't hire and fire. We cannot cut a budget. We can't get the department to come in midstream and say, hey, we don't like where your budget's heading. You need to take 10% off the top. We don't have that control or authority. So in essence, to restrict, and this may sound self-serving, but there are other members on this Finance Committee that sit on other boards and committees. It's not just me. There is no conflict of interest because we have no ability to ask the town administrator to request the finance director to write a check. We can't spend it unless, except in those couple of instances, and even then we didn't have that authority had town meeting not granted it to us. So that wasn't just given, that's town meeting will put $125,000 in that account again this year. So I didn't think that there was a conflict. We have members of this committee. I'm sitting beside one whose husband is a firefighter. Although she does not have to, when the Cascade Machine reserve transfer came due, she abstained. So some could argue that, well, she should abstain because it's a conflict of interest. How? It's not benefiting just her husband, it's benefiting the entire fire department. Now, if we voted, if her husband was the chief and we voted him a raise, that's another story. I think, Jen, you'd understand too because of Sean's status. So if this were to come before the select board, should the select board buy the fire department a new air cascade machine, I would expect you would recuse or abstain from the vote because of Sean's status within the fire department. But you wouldn't have to, because it doesn't directly benefit you. So I think this goes to just is what it is. I think that we don't have a list of people banging down the door trying to be on boards and committees. Obviously, it comes to light because I've been 3 years as the chair, and I enjoy the time I spend on conservation, and I would hate to see me have to make a decision between one or the other. But I also think that it's a disadvantage for Pat Mahar was just put on the redevelopment authority. Technically, if we leave the bylaw the way it's currently written, you could argue that Pat has financial authority. So he should not be on that. That's why I updated what the financial responsibility was, because I don't think he should be excluded from that if he's willing to volunteer and do it. These are volunteer jobs. We do this because we like to. You guys run for select board, you don't make a living at it. You do it because you're committed to the town. So we have 3 brand-new members on the finance committee, and these gentlemen are taking the time out of their schedule and out of their life to come in and become part of this process. Some guys get on and hate it. Some guys get on and some women get on and love it. I'd be lost without Beth, and I'd be lost without Meg. They do it because they want to. I think that restricting bylaws to its membership is detrimental. And frankly, if we were to lock down what has been said before is 1 committee per resident, we'd have vacant committees. We'd lose Concom, we'd lose ZBA, we'd lose members off the FinCom. We'd be struggling to fill boards and committees. So that's the purpose of that. And if I can roll right into capital outlay, because they really go together, Madam Chair? And then
Yes,
I'll be
please,
be
Mr.
very
Jermaine.
brief with this one. This one's self-explanatory. Capital outlay typically has a separate committee. They get together. When we did the PPE for the fire department, we did it in a joint session because capital outlay could appropriate the $400 and some thousand, but then FinCom had to say, we agree also, and then the select board had to make the final decision. So it actually made department head jump through 3 hoops. We were trying to avoid that. Since we had to be involved anyway, we invited capital outlay in a joint meeting with the FinCom, and it worked out extremely well. Everybody got their PPE. Capital outlay is not a super active committee at this point, and ultimately, if they became super active, they still got to come back before FinCom. So the suggestion was made by a member of our committee that we should look into possibly putting capital outlay as a subcommittee with its own chair, of which the FinCom chair could not be the chair of that. And they could work within FinCom and then ultimately together to recommend to the select board or to town meeting capital projects. And the membership on the capital outlay would be a member, and I changed this at Sarah's request, and I agree with it. Originally, it was a member of the select board shall, a member of the school committee shall, and a member of the finance committee shall be a member on the capital outlay committee. We changed that to may. So if a member of the current select board wants to be on the capital outlay committee, although we would welcome that, and I think that's a good idea, you don't have to. You need to appoint someone that would be on your behalf.
Just so you know, Mr. Jermaine, it still says shall in the version we have.
I think I sent you the update, right?
It's fine. I just wanted
I
people
just
to be
want you to know,
aware
it
of
is
it.
being changed to
Okay,
may. It's may for select board, may for school committee, and it is shall for finance committee. So you have to have a current member of the finance committee on the capital outlay. Just makes sense for logistics. It may have a current member from the school committee and may have a current member from the select board. And then 2 members appointed by the town administrator. and for that term would be 3 years. We also removed that no member may also be a member of any other board, committee, or commission. I think this was written at a different time for a very different reason, and I don't think that there is a need for that any longer, because the Capital Outlay Committee, there is not the same conflicts as perhaps there was 15 years ago. So that's pretty much it. They shall not apply to reserve fund requests made to the Finance Committee that fall within their available reserve account. So that won't apply to them, but any request shall be submitted in a format approved by the Capital Outlay Committee. It should then be recommended to the Finance Committee at a public meeting, and together the two committees shall vote on the request. This has a double meaning. The Capital Outlay Committee never before was recorded, never before was really that accurate in the minutes, and this is a lot of money. Just like the FinCom was never recorded until I became chair, as far as being video recorded. This is the town's money. This should be a completely, totally transparent process. There should be nobody watching a meeting that comes away not knowing every dollar we spent and how we spent it and why we spent it. The Select Board endeavors to do that. I've done my very best to have FinCom endeavor to do the exact same thing. I think Capital Outlay is exactly the same reason. If Capital Outlay is going to sit down and discuss a $400,000 project, I think it deserves more than a couple of minutes on a piece of paper that's written for later on and nobody really saw what was going on. Now, could they show up at the public meeting? Of course they can. Do they? This is a public meeting tonight. The auditorium's not exactly full. So that's my point. People are home watching this. People will watch it on YouTube. I think that, you know, the more transparent the money processes are in this town, the easier it is going to be to have residents feel good about what the town is doing, and the less likely it will be that they'll listen to nonsense that they read. So those are my two proposals.
Thank you, Mr.
I would
Jermaine.
hope that the Select Board would support it. That's
Well,
it.
thank you, Mr. Jermaine. On that note, I know the Select Board had its own version of the Finance Committee bylaw change, and I believe we had one for the Capital Outlay Committee as well, didn't we? Did we make some changes to
No,
that?
I think the only one, my only question was, and we can discuss it Monday night, the terminology of subcommittee, because when you have, I think a subcommittee is generally, 3 members of the Finance Committee itself.
Yeah.
This includes membership from, beyond the Finance Committee, so I don't know if technically it's a subcommittee, but I think the bylaw very clearly articulates what is expected of this and the interaction with the Finance Committee, so we can talk about that, the
I
terminology.
think the FinCom bylaw says we can establish a subcommittee anytime we want. Doesn't have to be 3 members, though, does it?
Well, maybe you guys can talk
Yeah,
about that on Monday night.
we can talk about that. Again,
I still want to know
By the
what,
way, I think this is very good. We did discuss this, and I think this is sustainable. I think the way the committee
this
is
is
now.
Article 12 we're talking about, the Finance Committee bylaw?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Capital Outlay. I'll mind my P's and Q's.
Madam Chair, could I just point out one thing? that
Mr. Townsend.
Might be a conflict, and perhaps they could work it out Monday night. But in Article 12, in the proposed FinCom Committee bylaw change, it specifically says that no member of the Select Board can be a member of the Finance Committee, which I understand. But then in Article 13, where it goes to call the Capital Outlay Committee a subcommittee of the FinCom, and it requests a member of the Select Board, well, that's a problem if no member of the Select Board can be a member of the Finance Committee. So.
Good point. And that's why actually they're going to work it out. I tend to agree that the Capital Outlay Committee is its own committee, but that's,
Right, but
you guys can work that out.
I do think the connection and the requirements to interact with the Finance Committee are very important, though. I wouldn't want to
Oh,
lose
yes.
that. So I'm just talking.
No, absolutely.
I'm just talking terminology.
Right, but
That's all
then
I'm
to
talking
Mr. Townsend's point, that's something you might want to think about as well. That
I think it means you can't be a member of the FinCom, but you could be a member of the Capital Outlay Committee.
I just want to make sure the wording is clear so there's no challenges
I
at
get
some
it.
point.
I'll be more
I'm
than
sorry.
happy to withdraw the Select Board, because the Select Board can put it in their own, at the one above it, Select Board bylaw change. If you want to make it easy.
Again, I just
Yeah,
think perhaps
we can talk.
Monday night
We
you
can-
should
we'll
double check.
discuss it.
Yeah, we'll work it out that it blends nicely.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for a motion to table Article 12 and 13.
I just wanted an opportunity to explain it.
Sorry?
I just wanted a chance to explain it, so that's fine.
I can't hear you.
I
Adam.
just wanted a chance to explain it, so that's fine.
No, that's fine, that's fine.
Thank you.
I'm just asking my board if we can have a motion to table both Article 12 and 13 until after the Finance Committee is met on Monday.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Bogart. Any further discussion? All in favor of tabling, please say aye. Articles 12 and
Wait,
13.
Jen Bogart says aye.
That's right, let's do.
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
Mrs. Bogart?
Oh, yeah, I said aye first.
Thank you. Sarah Hewen says aye. Motion passes to table Article 12 and 13 until our next meeting, passes unanimously. Hang on one sec. Article 14, I was contacted by the chair of the Conservation Commission, who very kindly sent a long email in detailing all the changes that the Select Board had asked for. He has indeed put them into the Wetlands Protection Bylaw as we requested, and he and the new amended version are going to be on our agenda on Tuesday.
Okay.
So I'd like a motion to table
Can I?
Article 14.
Can I make a motion to table the rest of the articles till next time? Because they're all just, non-FinCom related articles?
I'd like to vote on a couple of them, but if FinCom would like to go, that would be fine.
Yeah, it looks like you're going to need to get a long cup of coffee when you start getting into some of these.
I can't hear you, Mr. Jermaine.
Looks like it's going to be a long night if you go through the rest of this.
Yeah,
so
I think we may,
I think
but let's-
FinCom would probably like the opportunity to adjourn.
Yeah, can we have a motion to table Article 14 first, and then we'll look at the others and see if we want to table them as well?
Sure, motion to table Article 14.
I'll second that.
There's been a motion to table Article 14. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jen Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye. Motion to table Article 14 is unanimous. Okay. Wait a second. Mr. Jermaine, would you like to allow your committee to adjourn?
At this time, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn the FinCom portion of this meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the FinCom meeting tonight.
I'll second it.
Motion made and seconded to adjourn. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
I do have something I'd like to discuss if I can before we adjourn.
Okay.
If it's brief.
I will try.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes.
Given the dialogue earlier tonight about Article 6, and the fact that the Select Board has chosen to table it until a subsequent meeting, which is perfectly fine, I would like to get some clarification on the direction to the Finance Committee as it relates to that article specifically, because that article is not a Finance Committee article. We have a vote based on what capital outlay recommends, and then Select Board takes a vote themselves. But it's not within our purview or our jurisdiction to craft that article and make recommendations to the Select Board. It's the job of the Capital Outlay Committee.
Well,
This is
And just based on the dialogue earlier tonight, I got the impression that FinCom was to take up the matter, discuss it, and come back to the Select Board with a recommendation.
I think the reason
So
that
I-
Mr. Jermaine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the reason Mr. Jermaine discussed it is because there was no one here from the Capital Outlay Committee.
I think ultimately, point of order, Adam, I think it's got to come to us anyway. Even if capital outlay deals with it, it still comes to us also, even though we're not listed on the form, although I think we are in this instance.
We're listed as, we vote on it once Capital Outlay decides what it should look like. We vote and make a recommendation to the Select Board or to town meeting based on what Capital Outlay provides.
Okay, thank
But-
you. No, that's great, thank you. So that's Article 6, folks, in case you didn't hear what he was saying.
And the reason why I asked this question specifically is because I have intentionally delayed discussing this article and these items for the better part of a month so that we could have a dialogue with the Select Board, because it's not the Finance Committee's job or jurisdiction to craft this article. It's the Capital Outlay Committee, and that isn't going to happen this year.
Right.
So at least that's my understanding. So I'd like clarification on what the expectation is from the Finance Committee as it relates to crafting this article. That's usually done by the Capital Outlay Committee. Because, again, the dialogue earlier tonight suggested that the Finance Committee is supposed to figure out how to handle this and then make a recommendation to the Select Board. But that is not how this is typically handled.
Okay, so what are you suggesting that we do, Mr. Holmes?
Again, my suggestion since day one is, in the absence of the Capital Outlay Committee, that this should be a joint discussion between the Select Board and the Finance Committee on how to best resolve these issues.
Okay.
And that's why I personally elected to wait a month to have this meeting so that we could have that dialogue. But the Select Board chose tonight not to have that dialogue.
I thought we had quite an extensive dialogue on Article 6.
There's some information we don't have. I think, without going against my vice chair, and given the fact that we're looking at what we're looking at for time, I think that, would it be possible for the Select Board to give, you can't give us the authority. We'll look over the capital outlay budget.
Okay.
And then we will come back, perhaps at a joint meeting at Town Hall with the Select Board, and we'll just run through it with what we found out. In the meantime, it'd be great if the Select Board could also go through the capital outlay budget and then see if we can both come to an agreement, so that we're not hashing this out at town meeting. Would that work all right, Adam?
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that this doesn't require follow-up discussion. What I'm essentially just trying to point out here is that it's not within our jurisdiction, and we as a town have not figured out how to solve this problem. And again, I hoped that we would have that discussion tonight, and we didn't. I thought we would have a discussion about how this was going to be handled. So as a result of how it was handled earlier tonight, at the very least, I wanted some guidance from the Select Board on what is expected from the FinCom as it relates to this article.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes.
Sarah?
Mr.
May I?
LaFawn.
In my opinion, I think the Finance Committee, members of the Finance Committee have done a lot of research on these capital outlay items. They've spoken to department heads when they come in to do their budget proposal presentation. And in my opinion, I think the Select Board should be requesting that the Finance Committee make a recommendation to the board, because they've already done a lot of this homework.
Right.
That'd be my recommendation. At least, I know it doesn't meet all of, the goals here, but I think to Adam's point, I think it should be identified what role you want people to play here. Does that help Adam a little bit for now? It's not perfect, but.
Yeah, that's at the heart of what I'm talking about. I don't want the Finance Committee to assume jurisdiction over this when it's not our job, when it's not our responsibility, and we don't have the right to do that. We're happy to have the dialogue, but it's not within our jurisdiction. We don't have the right to do that without somebody giving us that authority.
Well, given that apparently we are not going to be hearing from the Capital Outlay Committee this year, is that the understanding? Then I, for one, would like to ask the Finance Committee's recommendation on this article. Is that?
I agree on that. I agree. I would also like to hear the Finance Committee recommendations, that you've met with all the department heads, you have more knowledge on these individual items than we have, and I think that's why it's important that we get recommendations on these individual items from the Finance Committee.
Is that a motion, Mr. Townsend?
Yes.
Thank you. That's a motion. Is there a second to ask the Finance Committee to give us recommendations on their recommendation on Article 6?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. There's been a motion and a second to ask the Finance Committee to give us their recommendation on Article 6. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jim Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye. So the Select Board has voted, Mr. Holmes, to ask your committee to please give us a recommendation on Article 6. Is that?
Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
Now we have a motion to adjourn for the Finance Committee. All those in favor?
Adam Holmes says aye.
Pat Maha, aye.
Beth Solder, aye.
Alan Jermaine, aye.
Tony McCreen, aye.
Greg Boudreau, aye.
No color, aye.
So carried. Parting is such sweet sorrow. Thank you so much. We can stay?
Thank you, Mr. Jermaine, and
We
thank
take
you
a
all.
2-minute break, because I'm going to make noise breaking this stuff up. Could you take a 2-minute
We
break?
could, I just wanted to finish thanking your committee. Thank you all for being here, and we really appreciate your work. Thank you. We'll have another 2-minute break. We are back in session. So Articles 15 through 28, some of these are articles that we're waiting on the Conservation Commission's vote. I believe they'll be voting their recommendation at their next meeting. Some of these are planning board zoning articles, and I know they have pulled a few things, tweaked a few things at their meeting last night. So the only one that I want to say anything at all about right now is Article 18. That, I have asked that to be withdrawn from the warrant, and the reason for that is that we found out, actually I found out just today, our treasurer has told us that this particular parcel is not owned by the town, so it's not in the care and custody of the select board, so we can't actually transfer it to the Conservation Commission. It is, however, in the process of becoming in tax possession, so maybe next year we can do that. So I am going to request that Articles 15 through 28, that we table those for next time.
I'll make that motion.
There's been a motion and a second to table Articles 15 through 28 until our next meeting. Any further discussion? All in favor of tabling Articles 15 through 28?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jem Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye. So that's a unanimous vote to table those articles until our next meeting. Is there any other issue to discuss, Mr. LaFawn?
I have nothing.
Thank you, sir. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
There's been a motion to adjourn. How do you vote, please?
Mark Townsend says aye.
Jem Bogart says aye.
Jim Hoffman says aye.
Sarah Hewen says aye. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.